Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Cracking the Cryptic, and we're going to kick off today with a fairly startling piece of Sudoku theory. Now we don't do this often, but I was reading a forum on Logic Masters Germany recently where an article appeared by the genius German constructor Phistomefel, and he had discovered the pattern on the screen. And what he discovered, and this dropped my jaw, was that the red squares in any Sudoku, not just a killer Sudoku, in any Sudoku, the red squares will contain exactly the same digits as the blue squares. I told you that was surprising. I hope you find that surprising. I found it completely shocking. I tried it on Mark earlier today and he also found it shocking. So these 16 red squares have to be the same digits as we get in these blue squares. Now the story then gets a bit strange because Phistomefel designed the puzzle on the screen to take advantage of that solving technique. But he then he published it on Logic Masters Germany, I believe, but then withdrew it because he was concerned that no one would know the technique, which I think is very fair. Only for Ulrich Voigt, the 11-time world puzzle champion, to intervene again and say, actually, don't worry, there is a beautiful solution to this puzzle that doesn't need this technique and you should republish it, which is what's happened. So my job today is going to be to try and solve this puzzle for you, not using this technique. But definitely, you guys can obviously play the puzzle by clicking on the link under the video, and you're very welcome to use this technique to solve it. I will probably do that later myself. It's certainly a startling one. Now, what I thought I'd do today is I will just touch on why this is the case. I mean, obviously, I'm presenting it as a fait accompli. You may quite reasonably say, how can it possibly be true? I will begin to sketch why it is true before I solve the puzzle, because I think it's quite interesting. And I will put a link to Phistomefel's post under the video for those of you who want to go into it in a lot more detail. Now, a couple of other things to mention. What do I need to mention? Yes, over on Patreon at the moment, our Patreon page, but not behind the paywall, completely free, we have 2 puzzle hunts. Now, these are proving very popular in self-isolation at the moment. They're great fun. There's an adult one and a child's one, and the child's one's probably for 7 to 10-year-olds. And these are by the Dutch constructor I always say his name wrong, Joke van Veenendaal. Yeah, he's kindly produced these puzzles, and they're definitely worth doing, and I know this because I've had so much good feedback on them already. Now, the other thing that appeared on our Patreon site today for patrons is our video solve of the April monthly reward puzzle. So do check that out if you're patrons of the channel. The way it works is for $2 a month, you get the regular monthly content, which includes the puzzle that Mark and I create specially for our patrons. It also includes things like the occasional solve of logic puzzles and cryptic crossword solves. So there is extra content over there for $2 patrons. But for $3, you also get the video solve of the monthly puzzle. So that's just gone up today. Do check it out. And with that, let's return to this. Now, firstly, I suppose I should talk about... we don't actually need to talk about the rules of killer Sudoku until we actually get to solving the killer Sudoku, because this bizarre pattern exists for any Sudoku. Now, to show you the bones of the proof, I will begin by highlighting these squares in red. And I'll ask the question, if I asked you the question, how would you sum the red squares? Now, the key to this is firstly to think about the number 45. Now, 45 is so important in any Sudoku because we know that any row, any column, or any box will contain the digits from 1 to 9. And if we add those digits up, we get 45. So, if I was trying to sum the red squares, what I might do is sum this row, and this row, and this row. And that would be 4 lots of 45, look. And then I might sum this column, this column, this column, oops, that's gone wrong, and this column. Now, if you were concentrating there, you would have seen that in doing that summation, I double counted these corner squares, because obviously if I add, it's easiest to see if I add these two rows together and then I add those two columns, you can see I'm double counting these 4 squares here. So one way of summing all the red squares would be to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lots of 45 and then deduct these squares that have sort of changed colour in the corners. That would give me the sum of the red squares. So let's remember that. 8 lots of 45 minus these 2 by 2 squares in the corner. Now another way of doing it might be to completely disregard the rows and columns and forget about those and to think about boxes instead. Now obviously any box of a Sudoku adds to 45 as well. And how many boxes have we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 8 boxes. So if I added these 8 boxes together and then deducted the blue squares, I would also get to the sum of the red squares. So 8 lots of 45, because there are 8 boxes, minus the blue squares gives the red squares. And you'll have immediately spotted here that we've got a commonality between those two pieces of arithmetic. In both cases we've got 8 lots of 45, and in one case we deduct the 2 by 2s on the corner, and in the other case we deduct the blue squares in the ring, but in both cases we end up with the same total. Therefore the purple squares and the blue squares sum to the same number. Now that is pretty startling, isn't it? Now I'm not going to go into now the reasons why actually not only is the sum the same, but the digits have to also be the same. You can check that out under the video, and I might give a shout out for the best comment on this actually, because sometimes you guys have a beautiful way of explaining it and I always like to see that. So yeah, for the best, clearest explanation, you get a shout out. So anyway, let's go back to this puzzle today. This is the puzzle we're going to try. This is yeah, let's reset. Now this is a partial killer Sudoku. If you're not familiar with killer Sudoku, how does it work? Well, the way it works is very simple. We need to make sure, for example, that in this, each cage sums up to the number in its top left hand side. So these 3 cells have to sum up to 22. These 2 cells have to sum up to 8. And that's almost all there is to killer Sudoku. The only other rule is that you cannot repeat a digit in a cage. Now, looking at this puzzle, that's not terribly it's relevant there, this 15 cage. So you cannot repeat a digit in this cage. And if that rule wasn't present, look, we could put 7s in those 2 squares. That would be a 1. This would add to 15, but this is not valid because the 7 is repeating in the cage. You must not repeat a digit in a cage. That's it. That's all there is to it. Other than that, it's normal Sudoku. Now you've got a choice about how you guys solve it. You can use this weird technique round the edges. Apparently that is helpful to solving this puzzle, or you can do it the way I'm going to do it, hopefully, which is to completely disregard that and just try and do it as a normal killer Sudoku. To do that, click on the link under the video, play along. Let's get cracking and see how we do. Now what shall we do first? We should do the 22 cage, I guess. Now 22 in 3 squares must contain a 9. And this, yeah, okay. So there are 2 ways that 22 can be made in 3 cells. It could be 6, 7, 9 or 5, 8, 9. Now in this case, look, it can't be 6, 7, 9. And there's a reason. It's because we've got 2 8 cages as well in this box. Now there are only 3 ways of making 8 in 2 cells. We've got 1, 7, 2, 6 and 3, 5. So if I take up 2 of those ways by putting the 6 and the 7 in the 22 cage, I've got no way now of filling these 8 cages. I can put 3 and a 5 into one of them, but the other one will have no solution. So actually this must be 5, 8, 9, which means that this 15 cage, we know every 15 cage must contain either 6 and 9 or 7 and 8. Now this one therefore must be a 6 or a 7, that must be an 8 or a 9. And actually, if we look, we've got funny 15s. They're sort of floating around the grid here. So there is a... Right, so there's sort of an X-wing going on with the 15s in the sense that whatever this turns out, if this turned out to be 8 and 7, this would also have to be 8 and 7. Because if this is 8 and 7, this one couldn't be 8 and 7, it would have to be 6 and 9, which would make this one 8 and 7 and this one 6 and 9. So there is a symmetry about the 15s. Oh, and we've got the same thing with the 5s. Yeah, I think I'm going to label these all up. So 15s have got to contain 6, 7, 8 and 9. 5s have got to contain either 1 and 4 or 2 and 3. Okay, so... Oh, right, so column 1 is interesting. Look at that. So, column 1 is very interesting because we've got a 14 cage here. Now 14 has two ways if we can make 14, 5 and 9 or 6 and 8. Now why is that interesting? Well, we've got our old New York Times trick here about hidden triples. Now look at this column. Whatever we've put in these three squares cannot therefore appear in those three squares axiomatically, otherwise we would repeat a digit in a box. So has to appear somewhere else in the column, but actually these three squares here can't contain these three squares because these are too big. So these three squares and these three squares contain the same digits. And we know these ones therefore have got to be 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9, which is all, oh look at that, it's nearly a quadruple down here. And nearly a quadruple along here. Ah, but we've got a quadruple along here using the 10 cage. So let's look at this. We've got these three cells have got to be 6, 7, 8 or 9. Let's think about the 10 cage. The 10 cage can't contain a 5. So if we think about the options, it could be 1 and 9, 2 and 8, 3 and 7 or 4 and 6. So one of these cells is definitely a 6, 7, 8 or 9 where it will join its friends and create a quadruple. So this square cannot be a 6, 7, 8 or 9. That square is a 5. Now this means there's a 5. Oh, this is beautiful. So now there's a 5 in one of these squares. I mean, how can this is fascinating, isn't it? Because this is beautiful, but apparently it's not how we're meant to solve the puzzle. But it's sort of, you know, I don't know whether it's the sort of symmetry of the universe or something that's working in our favour, but it's just gorgeous. This 5 must be in there, so this 14 cage cannot be 6 and 8 anymore. It's got to be 5 and 9. This can't be a 9. This can't be a 6, therefore. One of these squares has to be a 9 now. And the other one can be 6, 7 or 8. Oh, but look. So now we have got a quadruple here because this can't be a 5 anymore. Right. Oh, okay. Okay, so this is quite good as well because now this is a quadruple that adds up to 30. It's got 6, 7, 8 and 9 in it. Well, if these two add up to 15, these two add up to 15. So if that can't be a 6, that can't be a 9. And that means that's a 9 because we know there's a 9 in one of those three positions. So that's a 9. So there's a 9 in one of these three squares. Now, what next? Oh, So now we've got this 12 cage here. But this square has to be a 3 or a 4, because it can't be a 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9, because we know that the 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 are in some combination in the other squares. So that square can only be 3 or 4. So this has to be 9 or 8. Can't be 9. That's an 8. This is a 4. Oh, 9 here means that's an 8. I should have seen that before. Now that's massive actually, because that 8, 7 means that this square can't be an 8 or a 7. So this forced to be 6 and 9. This is forced to be 7 and 8. This is forced to be 6 and 9, which means this one has to be a 9. Oh, that's huge. So this is 9. This is 6. This is 6. This must be a 6, because we know this one can't be. There's no 9 down here. There's a 5 down here. Oh, the 10 cage now. The 10 cage can't be 4, 6. It can't be 3, 7. It can't be 2, 8. This is 1, 9. And that's quite good, because that's going to give us 6 here. That's a 9. That's not 9. And the 1. Yes, if there's a 1 in one of these two squares, there is not a 1 in the 5 cage. So that must be not 1, 4, it's 2, 3, which means this one is 1, 4, this one is 2, 3, that one is 1, 4. Oh. Well, there can't be a 4 in an 8 cage here. So the 4 must be in the 7 cage. So it must be like that. 6, that must mean that's 2, 6. This must be 1, 7. Where does 2 go in this box now? Look, we've got 2's locking the 2 into this position. So 3 must be in one of those two squares from the 3 here. That means 3's in one of these two squares, look. Oh, and actually 2's in one of those two squares as well. So this is a 2, 3 pair. 1, look, the 1's here. So we've got in this box, the 1 is locked into column 8 and column 9. And in this box, the 1 is locked into column 8 and column 9. So where do we put the 1 in column 7? We know it can't be here. We know it can't be here. We know it's not in this one or this one from our pencil marking, so it can only be there. Sixes, there must be a 6 in the 18 cage. Must be an 8 in one of those two positions. That's these 8's interacting. A 9 in one of those two squares. That's these 9's interacting. 6, 5, 9, 2, 3, 5. So in this row, what do we need? We still need a 2 and a 3. So these two squares are a 2, 3 pair. Maybe there's a way of resolving that. I sort of feel like, oh yes there is, of course. 2's, that's got to be a 2. 2, 3. These two squares have got to be 3 and 7. That's going to be helpful, isn't it? Because that 3, 7 locks this to be a 3. 7 is shifted over to this side. fact, let's just have a look at what we've got here. We need to place 1, 4 and 5 down this column. So we've got 5 there, so this must be a 1 or a 4. Ah, 1, 4 there, so that is a 5. This is a 1 or a 4. Ah, that can't be a 1. If that's a 1, that square would have to be a 9, and it can't be. So that's a 4. This is a 6, therefore. That must be the 1. So these 3 squares are 1, 7 and 8, aren't they? Oh no, sorry, 4, 7 and 8. Yeah, 4, 7 and 8. Ah, and that resolves the 4 at the top. That fixes the 4 and the 1 in that order. These squares are 1, 7 and 8. There's a 7, 8 there. So this is a 1. These two are 7 and 8. That can't be a 4, look. And 6s here and here mean there's a 6 in one of those 2 squares. These, looking at this column, look, we've not placed 1, 2, 3 and 4 at all yet. So that one must be a 2, 3, because it can't be a 1 or a 4. Now that gives a 2, 3 pair there, which means this is a 7. That 3 fixes the 3 and the 2. Don't actually know for sure that, oh yeah, we do now, that's a 2. 9, 6, 6 surely. That 6 has got to be in one of those 2 squares, so that creates a 6, 9 pair. These 2 squares have got to be 1 and 5, and the 5 here is going to be useful, so that's a 5, that's a 1. So down this column now, you can see these 2 squares have got to be 3 and 4, and there's a 4 there, so that's a 4, that's a 3, that fixes the 3 and the 2. So 2 in one of those 2 squares. I mean, you wouldn't have a clue. I wouldn't have a clue solving this puzzle that there is some sort of relationship going on between these squares, would you guys? I mean, it's bizarre. 2, 3 and 5. Look, look, 2, 3 and 5 into this row. There's a 2, 3 up there, so that's a 5. That must be a 2. That must be a 3. That forces the 2 downwards. That forces the 2 and the 3 there. 9, this 9 must be down here in one of those 2 squares. That's another 6, 9 pair. That happens somewhere else up there, I think. This must be 7 or 8. That creates a 7 or an 8 pair as well. There is an awful lot. It does feel like there's sort of symmetry going on everywhere. So this must be 1 and 5. 5 up there resolves it. 5, 1, 1, 7 now. That resolves the 8 and the 7. That resolves that's an 8. That gives an 8 at the top now. These 2 squares have got to be 4 and 5, which we can do because of the 4 here. That must be a 7. That's still working, I think. Right, what do we need in those 2 squares? We need 7 and 9. We can do that. That fixes the 6 and 9 at the top, which fixes the 6 and the 2 here. That can't be a 7. 7, 8 here is obviously sorted out. Right, we're running out of... So maybe this 18 cage is how we're going to have to unravel this. Let's think about it. So we've got a 6 in there, so we need 12 more, and we can't use 3, 9. So this is either 4, 8, 6 or 5, 7, 6. So if it's 4, 8, 6, look, they've got a 4 there. So if it's 4, 8, 6, that would be a 4. This would be an 8, and this would be the 6. If it's 5, 7 and 6, the 5 there means that would be a 5. This would have to be a 6, I guess, because we know the 6 is in one of those squares, and that would be the 7. Well, that's helpful, actually, because now, look, we haven't placed a 7 yet in row 5 of the grid, so the 7 is over there. It's not 7. And that's useful in terms of row 4 now. We've got 7, 7, 7. So that is 7. And if that's 7, these two have to add up to 11, so they must be 6 and 5. That gives us 6 and 9, that gives us 9 and 1, that gives us 1 and 4, that gives us 4 and 8, that gives us 8 and 4. 5 and the 9 is fixed, I think. This should be an 8, that's a 5, that's a 9. Is that going to work? Yes. Wow, wow, that's a beautiful puzzle. I mean, I loved it. I always loved Phistomefel's puzzle. I'm absolutely intrigued that there is another way of solving that wasn't the designed path. So I'm going to try it again later using the other way. But I hope this was an interesting edition, a bit different today, and we'll be back later on with another edition of Cracking the Cryptic.